that I am able to participate in this discussion and voting on this topic fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. And then one more. As many of you are aware, I serve in an unpaid volunteer position with the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. Because I receive no compensation from the Sheriff's Office, Virginia State and Local Government Conflict of Interest Act does not apply. I want to assure the public that I can participate in consideration of this matter fairly and objectively and in the public interest.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Collins.
Mr. Chairman, I also have a statement.
Okay.
Today's discussion involves the county budget, and this discussion may include funding for the Carroll County School Board. As many of you know, my spouse has a position of employment with the Carroll County School Board. With regard to the proposed funding of the school board, the proposed funding would affect the entire school system generally and not myself or my spouse individually. And as a consequence, I am a member of a group of 3 or more individuals whose spouses are employed with the Carroll County School Board and similarly affected by the decision on the proposed funding. Therefore, in this situation, the exception to the Virginia State and Local Government Conflict of Interest Act, Virginia Code Section 2.2-3112B and B1 applies to this situation. In compliance with that section, I hereby declare that I am able to participate in this discussion and voting on this topic fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
All right. All right. Anybody else? All right. At this time, I'll open the public hearing for the school board budget at 6:03. Anybody signed up? All right. We'll wait to close it. All right, I'll close the school board public hearing at 6:04. Council, can I open the public hearing for the county budget at the same time as that one's closed at 6:04? Or do I need to wait a minute? Okay, all right. At this time, I'll open the Carroll County budget and tax levy public hearing at 6:04. Thank you. All right. Fran Zimmerman.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of all the citizens and taxpayers of Carroll County, since they are the people that elected each and every one of us as their representatives to be their voice and to do what is fair and equitable for all of them. I came to you in February of this year to request some type of relief for our citizens on their personal property taxes, since the NADA values increased drastically due to the supply and demand issues related to the coronavirus. Since the February meeting, I have provided each of you updates on what all other localities across Virginia are doing to help their citizens with this unfortunate chain of events. With the last updated list that I received, I would estimate approximately 75 to 80% of other localities are doing some form of reduction to help their citizens. I have also provided each of you a copy of House Bill 1239, which creates a new class of tangible personal property for local tax purposes that will allow localities to set a separate rate for automobiles, passenger trucks, motor vehicles specifically designed for use by the handicapped, motorcycles, mopeds, campers, and recreational vehicles. This new law is applicable to tax years beginning January 1st of 22, but before January 1st of 2025. I received notification by email by the county administrator on Wednesday of this past week that it had been decided that you're going to leave the rate the same and look at it if the revenue comes in as high as I expect it to. I would not have continued to provide information on this issue if this were not going to be a problem for the citizens. I'm not sure if you didn't believe what I was saying, if you didn't comprehend what I was saying on all the information I forwarded to you, but I was only visited by one supervisor to find out more information. To give you an update on what I expect and predict the revenues to be, I generated a personal property book this past Thursday. This is again a rough estimate of revenues since we are only 4 months into 2022 with our values, and by no means are we near completion. But the first 4 months of this year, our reports are showing that just on cars, pickups, and SUVs, the increase will amount to $1.6 million in additional revenue from these 3 class codes. Again, that figure is 1.6 in tax revenue, and that does not include the revenue that's generated from business equipment, mobile homes, machinery and tools, merchants' capital, or public service. The average taxpayer with newer vehicle or vehicles could pay as much as an additional $100 to $150 on their tax bill per vehicle, depending on how many vehicles they own. A little bit more.
Yep.
If more than 2 newer model vehicles, their tax bill could increase as much as $500. I will ask again for you to lower the tax rate on vehicles to help the very citizens of Carroll County that elected each one of us to have their best interest at heart. We need to help the citizens and not put another undue burden on them as they are trying to recover from this pandemic also. I, for one, as an elected official, will continue to fight for what I think is best for the citizens. My door is always open if you have questions or concerns or want to learn more about what our office does in daily operations. Thank you.
Thank you. Carolyn Honeycutt.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I spoke to everybody but you. I'm here to speak on the same issue that Fran just spoke to you on. We in this room and all of your constituents are coming out of a 2-year pandemic, which left some of us emotionally traumatized, fearful regarding our and our family's future, economically strained, and suffering from great personal losses. Because of additional income taxes and additional gas taxes imposed on all the Commonwealth during the past 2 state administrations, our budgets are already strained to the limit. Current inflation is affecting all aspects of our daily lives regarding all the products needed to survive, especially household spending for groceries and gas makes getting by a real struggle for families. CensusReporter.org publishes that in Carroll County, the per capita income is $24,476, and the median income is $44,518, with a margin of error of 10%. This site also reports that 25% of our population, a quarter of our population, are 65 years or older, also with a margin of error of 10%. Surely you can see that families and households don't have a great deal of spending power, and those individuals 65 or older are very limited if they want to increase their income so that they can cover all these costs. House Bill 1239 created a new class of tangible personal property for personal property tax purposes, namely personal vehicles of most types. Localities may assign a tax rate to this new class that is different to other tangible personal property. The window to make this move is from January 1, 2022, and before January 1, 2025. Value of vehicles are adjusted almost yearly, and currently the tax rate is $2.30 per $100 of value. The vehicle values, as with other things I have mentioned, have increased, resulting in a greater tax bill for the families in Carroll. A greater bill that they, your constituents, can do without. My point is this: please reduce the current tax levy on the vehicles to help your constituents. If you do so wisely, the county can collect the same amount from personal property taxes as they did last year. As our local governing body, these facts should be a prime consideration when you make decisions regarding setting or changing tax rates for vehicles, which by statute you are allowed to do just on the vehicles. My 3 minutes are up, and thank you for allowing me to speak regarding this concern.
Thank you.
Thank you.
David Boatman.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm here also to ask y'all to please lower the taxes for the citizens of Carroll County. Not everyone owns land or homes, but everybody that goes to work has a car. And that's what we're talking about, the personal property. The other party in Richmond killed the governor's tax reduction for gas, which would have equaled around 22 cents a gallon, which would have helped a family of four an average of $24 a month at a very minimum. Could you please find it in your hearts to either lower the rates to where you would receive the same amount of money, or to a minimum have a drop of the $25 vehicle fees per car, which would give you about $600,000 less in income. Y'all know that I don't want to give you a problem without trying to come up with a solution. Here's a solution to recover that money. Any facility coming into Carroll County that has persons staying there for less than 90 days, you have the ability to charge what is called an occupancy tax. This could be an Airbnb, VRBO, any type of business that comes in that houses people for money. Those people don't live here. They would more than willingly pay $5 to $10 per night at a minimum of where they're staying. If y'all collected that, say there's around 400 of these in the county at $5 per night, and you have a lot of these coming up, the VRBOs, facilities coming in, housing people at short-term rates. $5 would give you around $700,000, $750,000 a year. If you charge $10 a night, it could get you as high as $1.5 million. 400 times 5, 400 times 10 times 352. I'm not a mathematician, but I can add that up fairly easy. The best part is it won't cost Carroll County citizens a penny. These folks are traveling through, staying here on short term. We can get a little bit of money from them. Even if I own the business or the VRBO, it's not coming out of my pocket or my profit. I simply add it as another fee to the stay. Just like if you go out of town anywhere and stay, it's everywhere. Who doesn't want to leave this room saying that they voted to lower taxes for every registered voter in the county? I ask that you please do what you can with what you have and help folks out. And look at that way to get a little bit of extra money back in the budget without costing the citizens anything. Thank y'all for your time.
All right, thank you. All right, I'll close the public hearing for the Carroll County budget and tax levy at 6:15. At this time, I'll grant the floor if any board members have anything to say. Oh, yeah, I apologize. I'll open the public hearing back at 6:15 for the county budget tax levy. We do have one that was mailed in. So.
Okay, we have a email sent in from Mike Goldwasser with the subject title hearing. It was asked to read this at the public hearing, and I'll move forward with. I don't know whether the increase in taxes being considered by the board is necessary. I do know that the fact that the increases result from the oddity of an increase in used vehicle values rather than from an increase in tax rates is a meaningless difference to the taxpayers who will be paying more. However, it is presented, it is a tax increase. Inflation has caused county expenses to increase significantly, just as it has for the taxpayer. Gas costs more for county vehicles. Gas costs more for taxpayer vehicles. We're all going to have to watch our spending a little more carefully. It is the purpose of tonight's hearing to decide who will pay and how much it will be. This will require a careful balancing of the needs of the county and of the taxpayers. To increase taxes based solely on the amount of the increase in NADA vehicle book values is absolutely arbitrary. It is convenient, but it shows no effort to consider the balancing of needs. To burden vehicle owners with the entire increase in taxes is equally arbitrary and just as difficult to justify. Whatever the ultimate decision, the board needs to forget about the NADA book and to begin as they should always begin, by determining the amount. if any, of increase that is absolutely necessary. Only after this is determined can they then decide on how that increase will be paid for, how the burden will be spread among the taxpayers, and that is the only fair, open way to develop a budget. Mike Goldwasser, 790 Birch Tree Road, Hillsville, Virginia, 24343.
I'll close the public hearing for the budget and tax levy at 6:17. At this time, I grant the floor if any board member has any comments.
Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate to make a motion at this point?
No votes on the,
No.
no votes on the budget until the 7 days have passed.
So we can't make a motion to change that tax rate?
You can when it's on the agenda for
Okay.
adoption.
I'll grant the floor if anybody has any other comments. All right, hearing none, we'll move on with the agenda. Davenport Financial Analysis Presentation.
Mr. Chairman, my name is David Rose. I've been here in front of you all before. My partner, R.T. Taylor, is going to hand out what we're going to walk through tonight. We know you've got a busy agenda, so we'll take about 15 or 20 minutes, and by all means, feel free to ask us any questions or stop us. We're not going to try to go through each page, but R.T. and I will do a little bit of a dog and pony show. While he's handing this out, let me start by saying that in doing the comprehensive review on behalf of the county is in good, solid financial shape. So we start, I think, from a position of strength. And having said that, you may recall, if you go to page 1, a little bit of the background. We are here not about tonight per se, or this budget per se, but rather thinking about the next several years, thinking about how to look at your overall capital program, how to be most effective with every dollar of the taxpayer. So that said, you may recall that back in August of this past year, we did a number of things, and one of those was to identify some refunding opportunities. You may recall as well, when I was in front of you, I said we ended up thinking there was an opportunity. RT's going to talk about that, but the upshot is we would not have been in the position to get the results we wanted, and then some, if the county wasn't considered desirable and in good shape with regard to investors. So with that said, we had hoped for about $1.7 million of savings, and that was going to be considerably better than our assumptions, but we talked about $1.5 million. So on the next page, what we're here to do tonight, though, is to recoup what we talked about. RT will do that, but also to give you a little bit of sense of how you compare to some of your neighbors, why we think you're in good shape, and why, again, the last couple of years have been atypical, but at the same time, we want to be careful and cautious going forward. Okay, RT, before you speak, let me give one more page, page 3. When we talk this evening about overall capital needs and addressing those, you've had an ongoing capital program. It's a work in progress, but you can see here on page 3 that there has been roughly about $30 million of estimated needs over the course of the next several fiscal years, 23 to 27. It's broken out by county and by schools, and again, it's a work in progress. I think there's 2 important takeaways here. Number 1 is that thanks to some of the external funding sources, CARES Act and ARPA, there's about $8 million that is available to help defray some of these needs. So what we were looking at, and I'll talk about today, is roughly a little over $20 million of needs and how to fund those. Again, it's a work in progress. It's an order of magnitude. But the important takeaway, and I'll repeat this a little bit later, is that the county has the ability, if done smartly, to take care of something like $20 million of needs without any additional tax equivalent increase. That's the takeaway. No need to extra burden on the citizens if it's done strategically. So with that said, I'm going to turn over to RT, and I think you're going to touch page 5 or 6, if I'm not mistaken.
So if you flip behind tab 1 and look at page 6, that's where I'm going to start. Through our preliminary analysis in coordination with staff, we identified a potential refunding candidate. It was a 2014 loan you all did through USDA. It had an interest rate of 3.5%. It had roughly $5.3 million outstanding, and it matured out in 2054. Okay, and when we ran our preliminary numbers and presented the opportunity, we were estimating roughly $1.5 million. So if you turn one page with me, page 7, this represents the final results. You'll look at the bottom here in the matrix on the left, we saved roughly $1.7 million, which on a present value basis was close to 10%. That's the industry benchmark when you want to talk about a bona fide savings opportunity would be 3%. So we were well in excess of our target there. The other thing I want to note to you all is the chart on the right-hand side. Your existing debt service on that loan went out to 2054, as I said a moment ago. We actually cut several years off, almost a decade off, and your new loan that took the old one out matures in 2043. So we saved all that interest expense on the back end, if you will. And to David's point a minute ago, we were able to get this locked in, turn one more page to page 8, at a very favorable time. Because the county is strong financially and the investors were interested in bidding on your loan, your refunding loan, before the interest rates ticked up. That's what you see on the right-hand side there. Over the past few months, they've really ticked up a bit. But I will say that historically, we're still in a very favorable interest rate environment.
If you go to page 10, let's talk a little bit about what we did in terms of looking at the last several years of the county's operations. And so rather than go page by page, just wanted to give you a sense of what you'll have. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, we certainly can come back. We certainly can add to anything. And of course, if it wasn't for your staff and Ms. Durbin, we wouldn't be here tonight. They were so helpful to all of this. But I think the takeaway here is you've had some steady growth in revenues. At the same time, the tax rate actually was down from 20 to 21, as you well know. And at the same time, there is some challenges, though. And so while the revenues were growing, we do see some challenges in the area of public safety, health and welfare. Those have moved up about 5% and 7.8%. So we want to be careful. And with that said, if you go to page 11, our tax rate is basically pretty much, I would say, with the median, a couple of pennies above that. But basically, when we look at your neighbors, RT and I talked about this, you're really pretty much in the thick of it, I would say. Okay? Then on page 12, RT, I think you had made some observations on 12 on some revenues.
Yeah, I think the upshot on page 12 is that the county has experienced steady growth in revenues. But again, as David noted a minute ago, we do have some potential challenges ahead of us, as time will tell, on our expenditure side.
You look at page 13, on the expenditure side and fund balances, so here's the other good takeaway, and that is that over the last couple of years, you've actually grown your fund balance. That's important because at the same time, the expenditures have been quite abnormal because of COVID. And what you'll find is we had a big jump in sales price. But again, we're not sure. We don't believe that's going to be sustainable. And if anybody follows the stock market, you saw Amazon just a week ago was selling at about $3,000, and today it's at $2,400. That is basically a proxy for the sense that maybe that sales tax that was moving so strongly is now down $600 in one stock alone. And in fact, just a couple of months ago, Amazon was as high as $3,700. So it is basically well over $1,000 off its high. So we want to be a little careful. Part of our job is to be cautious and to not assume that those sales tax revenues will be as substantial. The other thing that we saw during COVID was, again, there was some limitations on some of your expenditures, parks and rec, things of that nature, because things were closed down. So again, as we get back into this coming up budget, we want to be cognizant of that. And the third big takeaway we had was the jail expenses. They were lower than average over the last couple of years. Again, we're living in strange times. This is my 40th year in this. I haven't seen a pandemic in 40 years. In fact, I can tell you, I'm not sure I even heard the word pandemic in the last 40 years. So basically, we just want to be careful, but we also want you to know as a board that you're entering into the future in a solid position. And you see that on basically page 14. And what you see there, if you look at that green line, that's your, we call unassigned fund balance. And it's jumped up. It's got almost $24 million, and we'll see how it finishes this fiscal year, 22, which has got, of course, another couple months to go, basically May and June. We'll also take a look at what really happens as we get into some much more normal period into 23 fiscal year that you, again, are going to talk about. So I feel as if before the county embarks on any major capital programs, we're going to have the opportunity to see what this year finishes up, have to see what next year looks like, and at the same time, we'll also see what happens at the state level, because again, we still don't have a budget, and when we do, it'll be helpful to know what everything looks like as it relates to actual revenues, impacts on schools, and whatnot. Okay, I think because of time, I'm just going to jump ahead, and just to let you know on page 16 that we did a bunch of comparatives. We looked at that unassigned fund balance, and you can see on the far right-hand side that our unassigned fund balance as a percentage of your revenues for the general fund only is very strong. So again, we come from a position where I feel it's safe to say we've weathered COVID very nicely. Staff has done a good job. This board has done a good job. But again, we also want to be careful that things could switch very quickly. Inflation is up. Interest rates are up. A recession is very possible. Just to give you a sense of this, in the last 13 times the Federal Reserve has meaningfully raised rates, 11 of those 13 times a recession has been the result of that. So while we see you having a very good unassigned fund balance, we don't want to go out and see you just spend that. We want to be smart about that. And so again, we'll be back if you'll have us with some capital recommendations and plans, but I just wanted to point that out and give you that caution. Okay, let's talk about the next thing. I'm going to tee it up for RT here. One of the things that the staff asked us to do was to take a look at how this board indeed funds its school system. And so we've got about 8 or 9 pages here that I'm not going to belabor, but RT's going to talk about a couple of them. I think it's going to be important. Once you see all this, once you digest this, I think you're going to walk away feeling good that this board does its fair share of taking care of the schools. It does. And so, RT, maybe just want to talk a few pages, we said. Okay.
Yeah, we won't belabor each page. Like David said, there's several pages. The upshot of the pages that follow as it relates to school and the county, how it supports the schools, is that Carroll County is contributing more than their required local share as calculated by the state. And after factoring in the operations and the debt service for the schools, you'll see here in a minute that you're better than the majority of your peers. So if we could flip to page 22, again, trying to be respectful of your time. The chart on the right-hand side of page 22 shows how the county is funding compared to the state requirement. 100% would be right where the state does your calculation and says that's your required local share. you were at 118%. So you're almost 20% above what the state requires. And you can see you're basically in line with the peer median, your neighbors, at 128%, so slightly below. But we'd say that's in line. If you turn one more page to page 23, the debt service you're paying in your budget to support the schools is higher than the median. And when you factor those two things together on page 24, the peer group median for operations and debt service is 13 million, and you're at roughly 14 million, so roughly $1 million above the median. So again, the upshot is Carroll County is doing more than its fair share to support the schools.
So if we go to the next section on page 26, you'll see why we say that. And that's because, number one, if you look at page 26, the county has a little over 17.5 million of principal outstanding, but you could see it's heavily weighed towards the school side. And it's basically some 13 million or 3 times what the county side has. So as a result of that, a couple takeaways. Number one, schools are being funded through you. Number two, at the top there, you could see a very nice drop down in debt service after the 23 fiscal year that you are now in the midst of finalizing. So what that does is give us meaning collectively, an opportunity, if we so choose, and we do need certain capital needs, to layer in debt over time and not increase the annual actual burden from this board in future debt years. Now, you may decide to do that if there's some very large sizable projects down the road. But for the moment, that roughly 22 million that I talked about, all of that can be absorbed within your current debt structure, even at a higher interest rate than what we had estimated in using with regard to, your current debt levels. So let me just show you, if you would, and I'll just go to a couple of other factors. Page 28. This is what we call a payout ratio, 10-year. It's a fancy way of saying, how fast do you pay off your debts? Well, here's what you need to know. Higher is better. And so for you, 10 years from now, almost 75% of all your principal is paid off. Give you a sense of that for the citizens. The average homeowner that is fortunate to have a mortgage, a 30-year mortgage, after 10 years has about 25% of their principal paid off after 10 years. You've got 3 times that level. You're at 75%. So you're in a very good mode. Now, we like to see, as a local government, at least half the debt paid in 10 years, and you're considerably above that. So you're starting from a position of strength. Then on page 29, we have some ratios. These are what we call best practice ratios. This one is existing debt to assessed value. When you did some of those policies that we work with you on, you set these ranges. The good news here is that you are well below, in a good way, well below your policy. You're also well below your peers. So what that basically says is your level of debt relative to the value, the taxable value of this county is less than 1%. Again, another strong position to be in. And your level is actually what's called a AAA level. It can't get any higher than that. So again, I think over time there'll be some debt we'll take on undoubtedly, but you're still going to be very strong and you can be very much in that realm. And then the next page, this is what we call your credit card, your debt service versus expenditure. You have a policy, yours is 8%, which is again, very strong. You today are basically 2/3 of that. You're about 5.5 cents per dollar. That's the way to think about it. And it's going to drop down in subsequent years. So we have that ability to take on some new debt and not go above that level if we so choose or when you so choose. So again, you are better than your peers. You're in excellent position nationally. And again, you're taking care of all this debt accordingly, and most of it is for schools. So lastly, I'm just going to touch on a page or two and then we'll be done. Page 31. This is that dark green is what I showed you earlier. That's your debt service. But on the right-hand side, we said to ourselves, if we were to fill up subsequent years, how much can we fill up? So basically, between 23 and 24 fiscal year, the drop down is about $1.1 million. Well, if you do a little bit of math and do the old 10-to-1 ratio, we literally could take on $10 to $12 million of debt with just that $1 million drop down. That's the first takeaway. The second takeaway is in 2028, basically 5 years from now, that drop down jumps to $3 million. So that really becomes a very substantial opportunity. So to the extent that you do your continuous reviews of your CIP, meaning your capital improvement program, and there is, let's say, some new major project, whether it's the county side, school side, what have you, if we do this right, we can layer that to work towards some of those drop downs and be in a position where we're still responsible and we're not overburdening the county. Okay, so lastly, on page 33, you've had a preliminary capital improvement program. There it is. Perhaps the biggest takeaway in the 2023 year, and I would ask Mr. Watson if he wants to elaborate on that now or sometime later. That biggest part is that radio system, and so that would be factored in to taking care of all this. And the important takeaway is that that can be done without, again, having to ask for additional dollars in 2023 or 2024. It can be properly layered in, and that's the takeaway there. So with that said, we've got some more details on Section 5, the debt affordability. That really gives all the cash flows. And then we've got some appendices. But as I said, we're going to try to be very short, and just simply, if we can answer any questions for you. Hopefully this was in line with what y'all were thinking months ago. But I think at the very least, one of the things that came out of this was that very nice refunding when we really started delving into the county. So at the very least, we're $1.7 million ahead of time, ahead of the schedule, I should say. But I also hopefully give you all some sense of things.
Really, there's not much more to add. We've had an opportunity to work with Davenport to look at these financial analysis as we go along. The refunding did save us almost 10 years worth of debt payments. Also, it's been pointed out that there's going to be some debt paid off, and that in the future there's a possibility to do some projects. However, I take away from it, we need to give a little time. Don't jump in any type of financing right now. Spend the next year or two looking at things before we start issuing debt. And that's what I received from the study. I think that we're in a good financial spot. It's taken a lot of time to get there. The school system's paid off, together we've paid off and we're going to see a lot of drops off of our debt. I think in the future you're going to see that school system debt going down. I do feel like in the future you're going to have to take some of that paid off debt and help with the operational side of the school system, but those things we can work through the budget. So very good presentation, showed we were paying our way. That's a hard thing to understand sometimes where our way is, but this gives us some guidance, and I think it'll help do our plans for the future.
Does any board members have any questions or comments they'd like to share with Mr. Rose?
I'd like to say thank you for the excellent presentation. It was very informative, and explained a lot of aspects that I don't think we look at very often. So thank you for that, and thank you for your hard work.
Thank you. We appreciate this board and especially your staff. They couldn't do without them, so but we appreciate them also letting us be in front of you. So, not every board, I will say this. There's one that was below the required minimum, was Patrick County. I've been in front of Patrick County in difficult times, and I've said to them, you're not doing what you need to do, and you're in trouble. And the auditors reiterated that. Even though they're not financial advisors, they just look at numbers. We are your fiduciaries. We're required to tell you. And so it's not always a pleasant discussion, and that's just so you understand that, Mr. Early. But more often than not, we love to see this. And so, again, I think we couldn't agree more with Mr. Watson. We want to be slow and steady, win the race that way, not jump.
You're giving the same question that I had there as far as jumping. It's going to be a while probably before interest rates get back to where you really want to get in the middle of anything. So,
You know what?
do you feel like the year, as far as you mentioned, sales tax and some of the stuff is it's going to be a real cautious year for a lot of places?
I think
a lot of
so. I think so.
counties?
But again, even if I was an economist, which I'm not,
All right. Yeah.
it's just been such a crazy time. But sometimes the old saying, don't fight the Fed and the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
And they are trying to slow this economy down. If they're trying to slow this economy down, that slows, theoretically, sales taxes down. It slows other things down. And so, who am I to argue with them? It's just want to be cautious.
Does anybody else have anything?
Hey, Tracy, can I ask one question?
Yes, sir.
As you see, and we discussed it a little bit about debt and interest rates, there's going to be a point that maybe local government will be able to borrow money at a lower rate than what you can receive on interest rates in the long term. So there might be an opportunity to have money in the bank and make more money off the bank than it costs. And that hasn't happened in a long time. Right now, there's no sense in having, in your personal account, you're better off to get spend it, pay your debt down, because there's no return on it. So in the future, we're hoping that if interest rates on the money goes up, because local government can borrow for school funding and those type things a lot cheaper than what the interest rate might go up to. So you might be able to cover more of your interest, bite off if you're going to get 2% and they're paying 4% on the money, you might be just, when you're borrowing the money, if you need to borrow it, you might be borrowing it at an interest-free loan. So, but time will tell.
It will tell. Only time. You're right. Thank y'all.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd entertain a motion to go into closed session under Virginia Code 2.2-3711A8. And I want to add one to the possible discussion on the tax.
The A8 would be consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel. And generally, the nature of the topic would be board internal governance.
Okay. So I'll entertain a motion on that.
So move.
All right. Have a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? I'll start the vote. Mr. Early? Yes. Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McCraw?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
And I vote yes. And Discussion? Start voting. Mr. Early?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McCraw?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
And I vote yes. And upon a motion, the board conveyed, whereas the Carroll County Board of Supervisors conveyed a closed session this date pursuant to the affirmative recorded vote and on the motion to close the meeting in accordance with Virginia Freedom of Information Act, whereas Section 2.2-3711D of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the Board of Supervisors that such closed session was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Carroll County Board of Supervisors hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, the only public business matters lawfully exempt from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed session to which this certification applies, and only business matters as were identified in the motion by which was closed session was conveyed or heard, discussed, or considered in the meeting to which this certification applies. And it was 8-8. Yep. All right. I'll ask for a certification. Mr. Early? Mr. Collins?
I so certify.
Mr. Hill?
I so certify.
Mr. McCraw?
I so certify.
Mr. Dixon?
I so certify.
And I so certify. Entertain a motion for adjournment.
Make that motion.
All right, have a second.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Vote, Mr. Early?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. McCraw?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
And I vote yes.